So I'll talk about a few different perspectives about the fundamental nature of reality. So these are different point of views of saying or viewing what nature at its most fundamental level. What is it about? What does it look like? So the question here is, what is nature fundamentally made up of? So that's the question right here. That's that's what I'm trying to give some ideas about. So there is no definitive final answer about this thing, but various perspectives have been proposed, and throughout the history of humankind, people have been trying to answer this question, and various perspectives have been proposed. So the the perspective which is most popular right now in the modern time is materialism. So by materialism, I mean that the material world, the physical world that we see outside, that we see within our in our surroundings, that is considered to be primary. So, so let me just ask you, what do you think about this thing? So when I say what's the fundamental nature of reality, so when you look at anything, any physical thing in front of you, do you think that that's the primary thing, and whatever mental thoughts and everything is there, it's just emerges from this physical reality? What is your thought about it?
Just me.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, I mean, the most obvious way to experience reality is through the physical world. It has the most amount of, uh, it triggers the most amount of senses in our body. And so most people will, if you do not think deeply, you will think the physical reality is all there is.
Mm.
If you think a little deeper, you will find the experience of the physical reality is through our thoughts primarily. If someone is handicapped, let's say mentally, his
Mm.
experience of the physical reality is much different.
Mm.
So, what is real really? Is it how we perceive it, or what it actually is there? So, both of this are true in some sense.
Okay.
Physical reality is what there is, and how we perceive it is through our thoughts, which gives meaning to this reality.
Okay.
It's a very high level answer, so as of now.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. As what you said is true. I mean, the way you have said it, one of the perspectives that you said that physical reality is there, but you might also perceive different people might perceive this physical reality differently, depending on their perception or how they frame things. That's another way of talking about it. Yeah. So yeah, materialism, as I've said. So materialism slash physicalism. So those are there are, if you go into deep technicalities, there would be finer details which separates these two things. But for most practical purposes, materialism and physicalism is used interchangeably. And for this conversation also, I might use them interchangeably. So you can think of the materialism and physicalism as the same thing, which states that the physical world that we experience is primary, and everything mental, emotions, dreams, everything else emerges from this physical reality. So that's the core thesis of materialism. Now, the quite opposite, the exact opposite of this, the other perspective is called idealism. And idealism states that the mental world is primary, the mind and thoughts are primary. The physical world is not primary. It is derived from the mental world. And at first, it might sound strange because you might think that how can it be? Even when I first thought about it, when I first heard about it, it seems like, how can it be? I mean, this is the physical world. This is what I can see. I can touch everything, and the whatever thoughts that we have, it is inside my mind. But how can this mind generate this outer physical world for? It is very counterintuitive to think. But then again, this is the claim of idealism. It says that, yeah, the mind or the mental world is primary. The physical world is derived from that. Now, there are various different subcategories of idealism, which you could say that over the years, the idea of idealism, the concept of idealism changed or developed over the years with the different philosophers, different thinkers adding their own perspectives on this thing. So the most familiar at the time right now is called analytic idealism, which is proposed by the scientist called actually rather he's a philosopher called named Bernardo Castro, and he's also a computer scientist, by the way. So yeah, he says that the world is mental, but what he says is that the mind that we are talking about is of a higher being. It's not that our mind, this external world is not created by our mind. There is a bigger mind of some bigger being, and we are the dissociated fragments. Each and every individual conscious is just a, I would say, subcategory or a small piece of this universal mind, and from this everything else emerges. And the physical world that we see around us is just, you can think of it as a dashboard to comprehend. It's the same as viewing. It's the same as the user interface of a computer. What you see is in the computer is a representation. It's not the truth, which I think so you can agree, because whenever we look at the screen around in the screen, we might look at files and folders arranged in systematic way, but we know that deep inside in the actual hard drive, there's no files and folders out there. It's stored as electric signals or magnetic tapes. This files and folders doesn't exist at the fundamental level. It's just a representation of the more fundamental nature of reality, so that we can interact with it much more in a user-friendly way. So similarly, the mental world exists, and everything that physically we have outside of us that we see is just the user interface for us to navigate this world. So that's the core idea of idealism. So yeah, so these are the two things, two main perspectives. Now here comes the third thing, which is called dualism. So far what we have said is that materialism, which says that everything is physical and the mental processes are derived from physical. Then we have come to idealism, which says is the mental world, the mind and the consciousness are primary. The non-material world is primary, and the material world emerges from this non-material world. Now dualism says that both exists. There is the physical world and there's this mental world. That's why it's called dualism, because it says that both exist, both are fundamental. Nothing emerges from the other. Both are fundamental. That's basically what it says. And I don't have much more to say about it. There's the definition about it. But at the same time, there aren't many proponents. I don't think so right at this moment in the present modern times who agrees with this. And then, so I'll move on to the fourth one, which is called neutral monism. So neutral monism is what it is. It says that neither the mind and consciousness, nor the material world are primary. Both are derived from something even more fundamental, which it calls as the substance. This substance is the primary thing, and the mental world, the mind, the conscious, as well as the physical world, all emerges from this thing. So that's the core idea of neutral monism. So I'd say these four are the main I could say I can say that these are the four broad categories of viewing what nature is at its more fundamental level. Now there are some other subcategories as well, which are more or less somewhat similar as well. There is another claim called non-dualism. In a way, it sounds similar to neutral monism as well, because it says that there is no wait a minute. Yes, so non-dualism says that there is no separation between the mental and the physical world. It's just an illusion. So again, what it's saying is that there is no mental or the physical world. It all emerges from a single entity. It's just an illusion. We are all the same thing. So yeah, so that's the idea. So it somewhat sounds like neutral monism. So it's not much of a variation behind that. There's not much variation behind monism and non-dualism. And then there is another point of view, which is called panpsychism. So panpsychism says that, okay, and before I talk about this, I also want to clarify that why these different perspectives exist. It exists to account for this. From what I think is that there's this very clear distinction that we experience, that there's something physical and there's something mental, and all we want to do is try to figure out which emerges from what. So that's the idea that all these different perspectives tries to answer. And panpsychism says that just like all the entities has some certain properties. For example, a electron has a property of mass. It has a property of charge. In the same way, all elementary particles also has this property of consciousness. So as per panpsychism, even an electron is conscious. But at the same time, it's not as conscious as a human. So the thing is, what it's trying to say is that unlike from the other perspectives, what is think is that, okay, the laptop is a non-living thing, so it is not conscious. A rock is not conscious, but humans are conscious. But again, if you look at the spectrum of living things, you can say that, okay, probably an ant is conscious, but a horse is more conscious than an ant, and a chimpanzee is more conscious than a horse, a human is more conscious than a chimpanzee, and so on. So these things exist. That's the normal point of view of viewing things. But what panpsychism says is that everything is conscious, just like any elementary particle has the concept of mass, so it also has an elementary unit of consciousness. As this elementary entities combine and merge to form more and more complex structures, its level of consciousness increases. and ultimately, as it reaches the complexity of the human brain, the level of consciousness also becomes advanced enough to experience what we experience. So our level of consciousness is such because these fundamental entities have merged and ultimately form this complex organ, which you call the brain, and that is why we experience consciousness and the world as it is. So these are the different point of views of trying to understand the nature of reality. So before I move any further, do you have anything to say about what I've asked so far?
I don't have any point to make regarding any of this philosophy, but I just think that when studying or when learning about philosophies like this, I think we should also keep in mind, or we should try to understand in which context of the story that followed, which resulted in someone coming up with this philosophy. What I mean is, for example, let's say Stoicism, the Stoic philosophy is considered, or in a very higher level way, is considered, it has the, someone were to summarize it, basically someone who is like we use the term someone is stoic, someone who doesn't have feelings, or someone who doesn't display emotions and stuff.
Yeah.
And basically, the Stoic philosophy also preaches this kind of teachings or learnings. But if you see the context in which this philosophy was made, or it came up during the Roman Empire or whatever, where a lot of wars were going on, and the mindset of the person who, or the mindset of the few people who popularized or thought about Stoicism, then you will see why this kind of teachings are there in Stoicism. So similarly, someone who came up with this, what was the last one you're talking about? The electrons having
Panpsychism.
Yeah. So in what context or what kind of thinking did the person have, or the group of people had, when they were thinking about this philosophy? What did they notice? What was their story?
Okay. So as I have said, all those. Okay, I'll answer your question about panpsychism. But before that, I'll say that I've already mentioned that the motivation behind coming up with all of this materialism, idealism, dualism, panpsychism is about trying to understand the fundamental reality. So if you notice, I have used this word called ontology here. You might have seen it. So ontology is a branch of philosophy which is the study of what really is real. That's the idea of ontology. Again, I think I already gave this example. So let me explain you the word ontology, which is necessary to understand the rest of the things. So ontology, as I've said, is the study of what's really real, as opposed to what is being represented. So again, the very simple example which I gave earlier about what we see in the screen versus what really is real. So the thing is that, as I've said, the folders that you see in the screen is just a perception. But what really is real is at the hardware level, folders doesn't exist. It's not real. It's just a representation. So ontologically speaking, the things that we view on our screen is not true. The hardware, that's true. That's what it means to say that. That's what it means to talk about something from an ontological perspective. So all of these are different ontologies about the true nature of reality. So regardless of any, so what we see is what we see. That's we cannot deny that it's not real. What we see is, for all practical purposes, is real. But what we see, is it the ultimate truth? Is it what we see? Is it the final truth, or it's just an illusion, or just a representation of the actual reality in some other form? That's the question here that all these different ontologies are trying to explain. For example, and materialism says that, yeah, whatever we see, that's the final truth. There is no hidden layers behind it. It's the truth. What we see, if there's a laptop in front of me, that's the truth. No, nothing more than that. Idealism says that no, it's just a representation of something more deeper, some kind of mental process. And what you see in the physical world is just the representation of this reality. It's not the final truth. Now coming to the question about panpsychism. And okay, in all of this thing, again, so far you might have realized that there are two things that seem to be very incompatible here. One is the material world, and one is the what I can call is the non-material world, the world inside our mind. What this philosophers and scientists they call it the the outer cosmos and the inner cosmos, the universe, the galaxies, the planets, everything else. That's all we can see. That's the physical world. But then again, we have the inner cosmos within us, our thoughts, dreams, so many things we have inside our mind. We dream about things, we have ideas, we have thoughts. Those are non-material things. We cannot take a picture of them, we cannot taste them, we cannot touch them. Those are abstract concepts that belongs to the non-material realm. So the reality that we experience has these two kind of things that seems to be very incompatible with each other. So all of these things, all of these ontologies are trying to answer this. Again, that is also one of the main things that these things are trying to answer. So panpsychism's answer was that, just like materialism says that, okay, so I'll talk about, before talking about panpsychism, I'll tell what materialism says about this thing. Materialism says that if, for example, materialism says that the consciousness emerges out of our brain. That's because our brain is so complex enough that for example, a simple particle, an electron is not conscious, because it's a very simple thing. A simple molecule is a very simple thing. It doesn't have any consciousness. But after these simple things, if they come together and form different structures, and if it becomes complex enough, then suddenly consciousness emerges. That's their explanation. But there is still, but that's the most people do not find it satisfying enough. So as if it's saying that automatically there is a sudden jump, and out of this non-conscious thing, from the material thing, something non-material comes up. How is it possible? So, so materialism's explanation is not satisfying to most people. So for that reason, panpsychism, what it says is that instead of saying that there is nothing, there is no consciousness at the fundamental level, what it says is that just like mass and charge of fundamental particles, there's also a fundamental unit of consciousness. And this consciousness, when it comes together with other particles and so on, as it gets more and more complex, there's the level of consciousness that we experience. So maybe, did you understand this, or do I have to explain it again?
Understood somewhat.
Yeah. So that's one of the ideas, that it wants to explain this problem, which is also called the hard problem of consciousness. That's a term that's used, called the hard problem of consciousness, which was termed by, again, a philosopher called David Chalmers. Again, idealism also tries to explain this, but it says is that there is no hard problem of consciousness, because consciousness is primary. Instead, it's the material world that emerges from the consciousness. So that's its explanation.
Okay, so yeah.
Ask you.
Just some points actually I want to make. Then these are, as you say, they are trying to explain the true nature of reality.
Yeah.
Or the truth. I don't think any of them should be right. Is the term truth is not compatible here, because maybe what I'm trying to say will be another can become, or maybe already is another philosophy. But like for things like this, there is no truth that will explain it, because unlike science or maths, when you have a question and you try to start answering them, you will start with all different hypotheses and all stuff. But if there is truth, you will reach, all of them will converge at some one point, which will give you the answer.
Yeah.
For these things, there is no convergence as such, and you will never reach a common point. So one philosopher can be very convinced that his point of view is the truth. But if to someone it does not resonate, or let's just say that it does not resonate, it is not the truth to him. He will forever believe materialism is the only thing. Someone will forever believe idealism is the only way. There's never a truth that you will reach. That is why my first point was that I want to know what was their background that led them to think that pan was the term
Panpsychism.
panpsychism is a thing. Because if I myself I live alone, let's say I try and think about the nature of reality for 10 years or so,
Hmm.
this panpsychism kind of thoughts will probably not come to my mind.
Okay.
So what kind of environment did they have that they were able to think of something like this? Is what my initial point was. Because unlike science, where through trial and error you will probably reach at the same point,
Hmm.
even though experiences will be different. Like I think what is some concept of biology, like the evolution was also discovered by two people at different points, right? And around about the same time. So
Yeah.
like that, philosophy usually multiple different groups will never come to have the same philosophy. Depending on the context, it will somewhat always be different.
Yeah.
So there's no overall point I'm trying to make. It's just a question in my head.
Yes. But what I want to say is that there has to be emergence, because unlike what you have said, is that someone who thinks from a materialistic perspective will always might never accept idealism. So it's not that what I understand, what I believe in. What I think is that it is meta beyond science. Just a minute, I have to put up this charger here. I see. Again, these are also questions about metaphysics. Metaphysics is about called above physics, above science. So physics is the world, is the study of the natural world. It's about the meta level. So ultimately, one of them has to be the correct one. And it is almost like science in the sense that you cannot just make things up and say that, oh yes, no, that's the correct thing. You also have to provide your justification. For example, it's almost like you are a lawyer, and suppose you are trying to defend your client, and you say that, suppose you say that, okay, on the night of murder my client was at this club. I mean, you can make a claim, but the opposing lawyer will say that no, at the time of murder he was at the crime scene. Okay, that's your, that there are two claims right here. But you also have to justify your claim. You can't just say that he's at the murder scene, or you can't say that he's at the club. What proof do you have? Do you have any proof that he was at the murder scene, or he was at the club? So the one which will be believed would be the one that explains, that provides proof and also explains most of the phenomena. For example, if you say that, okay, he was at the if the opposing lawyer says that he was at the crime scene, but okay, that is a theory. But the car was seen near the club, so that explains another phenomena. That means that the defendant's lawyers will claim is much more correct, because it also verifies that uh, it also explains the car being at the club. So just by making a claim is not enough. A theory, the how much of a theory explains the reality, that is also that must also be accounted for. So right
Yeah,
now,
but here I think here the difference would be that in your example there is something concrete to prove.
Hmm.
To prove.
Yeah.
But here, if you can give all the proofs, or can try to explain the reality as much as he wants. But if someone else does not relate, he can reject it because you are not trying to prove anything concrete, and he doesn't have to. He is not finding any evidence then. You're giving arguments to things that the other person is not even considering.
I mean, yes, at some level you're correct, because as some people might hold on to their point of view so much that even at the face of the evidence they might say that, because they might say that, okay, but maybe there is some way in which materialism can, suppose, let's take, since materialism is the dominating point of view, any other explanation that comes, the scientist who believes in this point of view will say that no, maybe something else will be able to explain it. For example, okay, now I was about to give some examples. Maybe that might, I don't know, may or may not be, but let me just see what happens here. So one thing is correct, that none of them can explain 100% of the phenomena. None of them is superior at the moment, because even though materialism is the dominant point of view, there are things that it cannot explain. And I'll talk about now. Next, I'm going to talk about this kind of things. So first, I'll move towards materialism. Then I'll also talk about idealism. Okay. So coming to materialism, there are two things it is not very good at explaining. The first one is the inner mental life, again, which I mentioned. Everything inside us, the dreams, our feelings, emotions, many things are there, and things like there is this branch of psychology called depth psychology, which talks about the unconscious mind. And maybe in the future I will talk about Carl Jung's and Sigmund Freud's concepts of their theories about psychology. And they talk a lot about this unconscious mind, this collective consciousness, where their memories from your ancestors, or maybe there's a global consciousness, such kind of things are there. And those are part of the inner mental life. They cannot be physically measured. You can't take picture of them. You can't measure them with a measuring stick. You can't measure their weight. They don't have any physical properties. But these are mental concepts. So materialism cannot explain this phenomena very properly. But that's about the inner mental life. Now there is just another category, which is called paranormal phenomena, and this includes remote viewing, extrasensory perception, and reincarnation. And those are still very much, I'd say, traditionally, those are called pseudoscience and so on. But right now, there are legitimate scientists working on this, working on such projects. And in fact, so the U.S. government, I think it's probably CIA. They, over the past 50 years, they've been involved in various remote viewing experiments, trying to gather intelligence through remote viewing. Remote viewing means that a person sitting here can, through telepathically, listen to someone else outside, someone located at a very large distance away from its location. So those are called that's the phenomenon of remote viewing. So the fact that these things are considered pseudoscience, one of the reasons I think is that most likely it might be that people are deliberately trying to hide this kind of things, because it might have certain value, and if the general public is aware of it, it might come into jeopardy. So they deliberately try to keep these things out of the public's view. Then there's this concept of reincarnation.
But then wouldn't such kind of people be in the public as well?
Yes, there might be, but there's this tactic that if someone is talking about such kind of things, the thing is that You might think, but the logical thing, you might think that you should be able to, you should eliminate those people, but they do not do that. So if you suppose if someone is speaking out about some conspiracy, and if you eliminate that person, then people will think that yes, he is right, he's onto something. But if you let them speak something, suppose if someone says that aliens exist, I have seen aliens, and if you suppose abduct them and kill them, then people will think that okay, he was talking about aliens, now he disappeared. That means he was onto something, he was telling something correct. But if you let people talk about it, that they are the I've seen aliens, I've seen aliens, and you do nothing, then people think that people will most probably think that that's a crazy person. He's just he's high on drugs, talking something stupid. So one of the great tactics is that let them speak, don't interfere, because some concepts are so crazy enough that the more people speak, they will speak themselves into oblivion. So that's a very great tactic out there. So again, there are people who give TED Talks about all of those things, or maybe there are videos also. So the thing is that most people will probably not believe in them, because we grew up in a certain environment with certain understandings about how the world works. And if as an adult we hear something completely opposite from what we generally think about how the world works, you'll be in a shock. You'll not believe what he says. So that's a very good tactic, that don't stop those kind of people from saying things. So that might be one explanation. Again, reincarnation is another topic. There are active people who work in researching those things, and these are certain phenomena that exists. But again, materialism cannot explain yet. So now there can be two solutions. Either there are some laws of nature. Again, now coming to the things that you have said. Now, if I present this evidence to someone who is very hardcore materialist, he might say that I might say that okay, look at this phenomena. You can't explain remote viewing from a materialist perspective because it's not possible. So the possible explanation would be idealism, because idealism says that the mind is primary. So then it would be compatible that okay, maybe because mind is primary, that means mind-to-mind communication over large distances might be possible too. That's a valid explanation under idealism. But again, this hardcore materialist might say that maybe we do not know. There are certain laws of nature yet, which might be able to explain this under the materialist perspective too. Again, I do not disagree with that phenomenon, that perspective. Yes, it is certainly possible. It is certainly possible for that to happen. So yes, so if someone is very hardcore into it, even at the face of evidence, they will always come up with this kind of explanation that okay, maybe there exist certain things which cannot explain this thing. But at the same time, there is a concept in philosophy and probably in science too, which is called the Occam's razor, or the concept of parsimony. This concept says that if there are two competing explanations about a certain phenomena, the one which is much more simpler and requires fewer assumptions should be, I would say, should be accepted. It's like it's almost the equivalent of sportsmanship. For example, in football, suppose a player gets injured, unless it's a head injury, the team is not obligated to stop. I mean, the referee will not stop the game if it's a leg injury or anything else. If it's a head injury, then yes, the referee will stop the game. But any other injury, there's no obligation by the opposing team to stop the game. They can continue playing. But out of sportsmanship, so that the player can receive treatment, they throw the ball out of play, so that the player can receive that thing. So in the same, I would say parallelly the same thing in science. The thing is that if you personally hold on to something, some theories, if some other theory can explain this in a much more better way, with fewer assumptions and fewer workarounds, then in the name of sportsmanship, you should keep your ego aside and just accept that thing. Because even though your theory might be able to explain it, but you have assumed too many things. Your theory is much more complex. By the law of parsimony, the Occam's razor, the simple explanation should be accepted. So that's the equivalent of sportsmanship in science and philosophy. So in some way, the materialist might be true that there are some laws of nature which might explain paranormal phenomena, which might explain our mental world too. But as of now, if idealism gives a simpler answer with less fair assumptions, you should have the sportsmanship to accept that thing. If you cannot, then that speaks about his character. So that's one of the explanations that I can give here. So did you get any idea about this? Any thoughts?
Good thoughts really now. You also have to deep, deeper in this to have more understanding or more questions.
Okay. Okay, so yeah. So as I said, just one more section, one more very brief section, and then this will be over. So so far I've given this thing certain questions that materialism cannot explain, but there are also certain things that idealism cannot explain yet. One of this is the consistency of laws. By what I mean is that idealism claims that the reality is mental, but we see that there is some consistency. By that I mean that you and I see the same world, and you and I experience the same laws of physics. It's not different for you and me. But if you look at it mentally, if you imagine something, you can imagine whatever you want, and I can imagine whatever I want. I can fly if I want in my imagination, and you can swim if you want in your imagination. There's no laws of, we don't have any, your mental imagination and my mental imagination does not have to follow the same laws of physics. You can make up your own laws, I can make up my own laws, so on. But the world that we experience around us, it has a consistent consistent laws of physics. So if the world is mental, then why is there this consistent laws of physics? Shouldn't everything be random? So idealism cannot explain this thing as properly as materialism. So for idealism to claim itself to be superior to other paradigms, it must also be able to explain why there is this consistency. So again, everything has their own areas that it needs to improve upon. So at the personal level, I'm more concerned about materialism and idealism, because others, I'm even most scientists or most philosophers do not think much about, as far as I know, they are not much about the other point of views, other ontologies. Most are concerned about either materialism or idealism. And yeah, so that was about it. And so today I just gave a very big picture, probably the biggest picture of the study of nature of reality. So moving on in the future, I'll go in the depth of each of these things. Maybe I'll go into idealism and Bernardo Castro's theory of analytical idealism and how he explains everything. And also I might go into different aspects of materialism and so on. And how concepts from sciences like quantum mechanics and some other areas about and cognitive science, intelligence, what do they have to talk about, and what do scientific results from this kind of scientific endeavors can be used as evidence for either the world is material or ideal, or it's idealism. So how can we take so as I mentioned, that just claiming things isn't enough. You also have to provide evidence for your claim. And again, if you are an honest scientist, by the laws of parsimony, you should have the courage to accept what's correct. So, but from a scientist's point of view, trying to prove one form of ontology over the other, you'll have to look to prove this. You have to go into the basic sciences. Like you have to look at physics. You have to look at neuroscience, biology, and other sciences, and search for evidence that okay, this kind of sciences, they study about the field, about the world around us. So what does the results from these sciences can be used as proof or evidence that the world is either material or ideal. So in the coming days, weeks, and years, we'll go into the finer details about all of those things. So that's why I wanted to cover these things, because everything else will be the details. This is the final big picture. Everything else is details. So yes, that was it about the different ontologies about the fundamental nature of reality.
Okay, so I also don't have anything further to add.
Okay, then we can end it.